is LoG, and welcome to another edition of LoG Power-Ups. Today's power-up, we will focus on string skipping, which is when you skip strings. This power-up will be split into parts 1, 2, and then the final part, with each video ending with a backing track that gradually increases tempo for you to play over. If you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below. And now let's get on to part 1. All right, before we start learning this part, I will say there are a variety of different techniques that you can use to accomplish this sound, this string skipping sound, and all of them are viable. You don't have to do it how I'm doing it. You can play it however you want. We'll go over a handful today that I think are probably the most common and valuable, but do keep in mind you can use whichever techniques you want at the end of the day when you are practicing this. So let's go over what string skipping actually is. It's pretty much what it sounds like. You are skipping strings, right? So the beginning of the phrase that we're playing today looks like this. 2 notes on the G string, in this case E, F sharp, and then we skip the B string, go right to the E string, and play this D on top, just like that. Hence, skipping strings. We are playing the G string, skipping the B string, going to the high E string. So this is difficult, or traditionally seen as a difficult thing to do on guitar, because your hand has to make a bigger jump than it's used to. If you play a straight scale, let's say, where you're never skipping strings, you're kind of always moving down at a very gradual kind of small rate. But if you are skipping strings, your hand, has to make a pretty big jump immediately, which can be difficult for your accuracy, accidentally hitting that string you're supposed to be skipping. All of those things can be a problem. So this is why it tends to be a difficult technique. So let's go over 3 or maybe really 4 ways that we can achieve this sound or achieve this technique. All of them are going to be different difficulty levels depending on where you're at technically, but all of them are valuable. So the first one, the most obvious one, is alternate picking. Just down, up, all the time. No hammer-ons and pull-offs, just straight alternate picking. That would sound and look like this. That one is probably the most difficult, but honestly probably the most valuable one, because it will really do wonders for your accuracy when you are picking. This one is difficult because, like I just said, you are picking every single note. Your right hand has to be right on top of things. You have to be accurate. You can't accidentally hit the open string in between. You have to be really accurate with what you're doing. And not to mention, depending on the phrase, you might be skipping to that high string with different types of pick strokes, right? That was me jumping to that high string, leaving the low string with an upstroke, starting the next with a downstroke. That's called inside. But then you might come across a situation where it's the opposite. You're leaving the low string with an upstroke, a downstroke, and then starting the next string, the high one, with an upstroke. That would look like this. That's called outside the string picking. 2 very different picking configurations as far as how they feel, and you might have to practice both of them individually, which you can kind of do that in this power-up, which we'll talk about here in a second. So that can be kind of difficult right there. Another way to do this that's kind of a little bit easier and sounds different in my opinion is sneak in some hammer-ons. In this case, well, you could do hammer-ons or pull-offs depending on the phrase, but in this case, it would be a hammer-on. That would look like this. Pick, hammer-on, reach to that high string with whichever stroke you want, right? You could do a downstroke on that high string or an upstroke. It doesn't matter, because your right hand, your picking hand, during that hammer-on is not doing anything. So it has time to prepare whichever pick stroke you want, either the upstroke or the downstroke. So I could do both right there. Check this out. I'll do it with downstrokes first. That's downstroke on that top string. Now I'm going to do it with an upstroke. They're both viable and they both feel comfortable. Again, because my right hand has time while my left hand is doing that hammer-on. Play the right note. My right hand has time to get to that top string. Whereas if you're straight alternate picking, you don't have time. You have to abide by the back and forth motion, which is why things can be a little bit trickier with that. The other technique, or one of the other techniques that you can use, is the technique that I'll be using, and that's pick and fingers, right? Or hybrid picking, as most people say. So what that is, or what that would look like, is I'll pick this low note, hammer on, and then grab a high string with my finger, either my ring or middle. I'm actually using both, which I'll go over here in a second. Just like that. I find this to be the most efficient way to accomplish this exact technique or this sound, mostly because when you do this, your hand doesn't move. It doesn't have to move. If you see my hand, here's my pick. It doesn't need to leave the G string, right? Because my ring finger is going to take care, or my middle finger, is going to take care of that high E string. And the great part about this whole thing is my fingers are kind of already there. When I pick the G string, my ring finger is just naturally kind of resting around the high E string, so I can easily grab it. It's already there, ready to go. So my hand doesn't have to move. Again, if I play it, that's one of the main benefits of this technique, this hybrid picking technique, is that it's just more efficient. Your fingers are there, ready to go to grab those higher strings if you want to, and you don't have to move nearly as much as trying to pick everything or use hammer-ons and pull-offs while still picking. So all of those techniques are good. The last one I suck at, so you're gonna have to look for another video to really get into this, and that is hammering on to the lower string. So I've heard this, the popular term is hammer-ons out of nowhere or hammers out of nowhere. A big guy who does this is Greg Howe. If you're not familiar with him, he's amazing. Check him out. But that would be something like this. I play a high note, like the high E string, and instead of picking the G string again like normal, coming back to the lower string, I actually hammer that note on like that. So see that in my ring finger? I'm hammering that note. I'm not picking it. Again, doesn't sound that great because I'm not good at this technique, but a lot of people are very good at it. I feel like you usually have to have a little bit more drive or compression to really make that hammer-on really pop out. But again, something, if you find value in that technique, feel free to practice it however you want. So you could try that also. I'm going to be doing picking fingers, so if you want to follow me, you can. If you want to try any of these other techniques, feel free. With that in mind, let's get onto the actual phrase, the actual part that we're working with. It starts off very similar, but let me play the full phrase. It is a 7-note phrase, and then I'll show you how everything connects. It sounds like this. That's the phrase, and then we move on, do it somewhere else, little transitional stuff, move on, do it somewhere else, etc. So that phrase sounds like this. 2 low notes, in this case E, F sharp on the G string, jumping up to the high E string D, coming back to the F sharp on the G string, high E string C sharp, back to the F sharp on the G string, go back to the E. So it's 2 notes on the G string, reach up to the E, G string, same note as you just played, high E string, back a note from where you just played, back to the G string. Just like that. One more time, slow. Also, something really important to hear and feel when you're playing this part, these 2 notes, those first 2 notes are pickup notes, meaning this is not happening on the downbeat. This note is. Bam, that high string, that's the note on the downbeat. So if you're thinking about this in time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Right there. It's not, 1 is not here. 1 is here on that first string skip. So make sure you're doing that, otherwise the whole thing won't sound right. So that's the first phrase. Again, if you want to practice this alternate picking, you would be exactly what you think. Again, because of how the pickup situation is happening, where this note is on the downbeat, that means every time I make that string skip, I will be using a downstroke to grab those top notes. Just like that. Now, if I'm using a hammer-on right here, I can use whichever pick stroke I want for those top notes. I can do downstrokes like I just did, or I can do upstrokes. Again, they're both viable because my right hand has that tiny little moment of preparation given to it by the hammer-on the left hand to do whatever pick stroke it wants, right? So that's possible. And then again, using picking fingers. How I would be doing this, something interesting if you're curious, pick, hammer-on, ring finger for the first skip, pick on the G string again, middle finger for the next skip, then back to G string, pick. So I'm actually using ring in the middle. I'm alternating my right hand picking. You can kind of see my hand if it's possible. One more time. I'll do it over and over again. Now I'm doing this because at higher tempos, using one finger over and over again can get kind of strenuous. So I'm just alternating, just easier. Again, trying to be more efficient. Something if you're not used to, I would try it because it might seem a little awkward in the beginning, but it's actually pretty easy once you get it down. Cool, that's the first one. Next one is the exact same configuration. We're just starting back a whole step, and we change one little note to have some semblance of a key, and that would sound like this. It's the exact same thing. So instead of starting on E, we're starting on D, and the notes are D, E, C sharp, E, B, E, D. So you'll notice the main difference. The first one, pointer, ring finger, and then reaching with the middle on top. The next one, it's pointer, ring, reaching with the pinky on top. So the configuration is just a little bit different. First one, we're using these 2 notes and then these 2. This one, we're using these 2 and then these 2. Same thing otherwise. Which then brings me to the next point. If I play these two phrases, just the groups of 7 exactly how they are, and put a little silence in between them, you can really see what they are. First one's like this. Next. One more time, do a little slower. One more time. Pretty straightforward, right? But that's not what we're going to be doing in this power-up. What we are going to be doing, because these are two groups of 7, we're going to be playing them non-stop. And because they are groups of 7, the rhythm will sound a little offset. It'll sound odd time, which of course it is because they're groups 7. Our ears want them to be groups of, or even numbers, so 6, 4, 8, but because they're not, everything sounds a little bit offset. That sounds like this. Still the same two groups, but it might not sound like that. If I count out the numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You'll notice it's the same groups. I'm just not putting any silence in between them. I'm going one right into the other. So when it comes to technique, if you're using pick and fingers, you'll notice my right hand is doing the exact same thing both times. It's exact same thing. If you are doing pick with some hammer-ons, you can also pretty much do the exact same thing. See what I'm doing there? Pick, hammer-on, up, down, maybe up right there, down, hammer-on, up, down, up, down. It's exactly the same thing both times. However, if you are alternate picking this whole thing, that's where things can get extra tricky. Because it is a group of 7 notes, when you repeat the phrase, you will be starting on a different pick stroke. I've talked about this in other power-ups. This means that everything you're doing is going to be the opposite of what you just did. For example, if I do this, notice the pick stroke I'm using to reach those top strings. Down, down, like that. But then if I continue nonstop, watch the next one. Down, down, up, up. Oh, excuse me, want to play the right notes? That's one of the reasons why string skipping, alternate picking is hard, because you have to be accurate, unlike what I just did right there when I played the open D string. So notice when we are doing that, moving from a group of 7 to another group of 7, and we are strictly alternating, the entire picking configuration flips, where one way you're starting on a downstroke, where the other way you're starting on an upstroke. That is why the alternate picking version of this power-up is the most difficult one. If you want to practice this to work on your accuracy with your alternate picking, by all means do that. If you want to try some of the other ones just to get a smoother sound, it's completely up to you, right? You want to think about the purpose of the exercise. If you want to work on your technique, alternate picking everything is really good. If you like the sound of the hammer-ons, right? It's a little more like smoother sound. Sometimes if you're doing straight alternate picking, it can sound very like even dynamic because it's just you're just picking everything, kind of sounds like machine gun style. But if you throw in some hammer-ons, sometimes the notes on the other side of the hammer-ons can be a little bit more accented. That sounds like if I were to mouth that ba-do-da, da-do-da, as opposed to this. That's da-da-da, da-da-da. There's no real dynamic shape to that. But this, or with the finger, that has this ba-do-da, it has this little dip in dynamic, which can be pretty cool for your line as well. So don't just think about this purely from the technical perspective, even though that's great. Also think about it from the musical perspective, the kind of shape, the articulation, the phrase perspective, which can be just as valuable, right? So that's why the hammer-ons, or maybe using pick and fingers, can be equally as valuable as alternate picking. All right, so that's that first little bit. Let's just move on to the next part. It's going to be really similar, just a little transition. So, first one. After that, we finish the first two groups. Go back one fret to C sharp, middle finger on the D string A. Those are our two little transitional notes. That's it, two little transitions. C sharp A. Then what we do is move up a whole step with our middle finger. Now we're on the D string right here, and we are going to be jumping to the B string with the same exact configuration. Watch this configuration. It's the same exact thing, right? Just on a different set of strings. The first one, first group of 7, starts on B, C, A, C, G, C, B, backwards like that. Remember, the configuration is the same. What was the first one? Now we're on to the third one on the lower string. Slightly different notes, of course, and we're kind of implying a different chord here just for fun, but it's still the same picking configuration, the same structure. After this, we continue to the next one. Fortunately, Looks exactly the same fingering-wise as the first one. Remember the first one? Next one, or the last one, I should say. Right, hammer on, pointer, ring, reaching with the middle finger on the B string now. Back to the ring, pointer. Right, so let me play all of that so you can see how it all flows. Now, this is where things change a little bit more. From this top note right here, I'll do it a little bit slower, the second group. Right here, we walk down what feels like a B minor pentatonic scale. So E, D, B, A, F sharp. I'll do that one more time. Really simple, just pentatonic, right? Once we hit that middle finger F sharp, slide up one fret to G, and then we play the F sharp on top, and that is the end of part one. That will also be the beginning of part two that we'll talk about in the next video, but that's how this one will run. Right? Notice all of these top notes for the beginnings of the phrases, bam, that's always going to be the downbeat. Watch this. Downbeat. Downbeat. Downbeat right there. So always keep in mind that big top first string skip of each little group is going to be your downbeat. That will kind of place all these notes rhythmically, properly in your ears so it'll all make sense. Let me play that whole thing one more time, nice and slow, make sure you got everything. That's the end. Keep in mind my fingering too. I don't know if it's the best fingering, but you can change it however you want. But what I am doing right here, pretty straightforward. When I get to this little transitional, middle finger, slide, ring finger. And I think that's me doing a slide and then a hammer on. I don't think I'm picking much of that, at least I think. And that you can do however you want. You can pick everything. Normal. I'm doing pick pull-offs. Just like that. Again, completely up to you, however you want to do this technically. That's the part. So let me do this one more time, nice and slow, to make sure everything locks in. That's it. So this is part one. In the next video, we'll go over part two, and then that's pretty much it for this whole power up. Let's run this over a backing track, I think from 70 to 100. Again, it's going to be this type of thing. Keep in mind, we're starting on a pickup, right? So this is not the downbeat. This is the downbeat. Bam. So you will need to think ahead of the pulse. Also, when we restart, it's going to feature that pickup, right? You want to really make sure you know exactly when you're coming in. Feel when that downbeat's about to happen. I'm doing like 3 little beats before we restart. You'll hear that all in the playthrough and you'll lock in. But always keep in mind that pickup. That's the most important part. So let's now get on to this backing track. All right, that does it for part 1 of this string skipping power-up. As usual, if you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below, and I'll see you all in part 2.